Good evening, welcome to this Saturday night of Audiorama. Our guest tonight is a true pioneer, a true innovator, somebody who wrote a new chapter in the history of electronic music and of music performance. It has a lot of things to say. We are talking about the future of music, but you cannot talk about the future if you don't have a past and if you don't have a present. So it's an honor for me to invite to this wonderful coach, Monsieur Jean Michel Jarre. Okay. How are you?
Good evening. Yes.
Okay. As I was saying a few seconds ago, it's good to talk about the future if you have a past. And your beginning was very interesting with the experience of the musique concrète. And so can you just talk about how you started your career and your life as a musician?
Actually, I started this, studying music and being in some obscure local rock bands, and then I met somebody who became very important in my life, with Pierre Schaeffer, with the used to be the head of the Music Research Center in Paris, and the father of what is called musique concrète. And I discovered there something which was totally new for me and for lots of musicians in general. For the first time, you had somebody talking about music not only in terms of notes and based on solfeggio, but talking about music in terms of sounds and considering that doing music is also going with a microphone outside and recording the sound of the wind, the sound of the rain, and making music with it. And that was for me a kind of revelation, and I suddenly, being from Lyon, which is famous for in France and all over the world for cooking, I always considered electronic music like cooking, and mixing frequencies and waveforms seemed to be something that I wanted to experiment. And in those days, we were all considered as a bunch of strange guys working with machines were not even considered as music instruments. Actually, it was even before, when I was a teenager, when I started with working in this environment. Actually, it was really the idea of working with oscillators coming from radio stations and filters. Actually, electronic music owes a lot to radio stations, because actually it's like the BBC in the UK, like in France with Radio France, in Germany also. I mean, in lots of countries, it's. I mean, the first electronic music studios have been created around the radio stations environment.
So radio stations had like studios in the same buildings and stuff? It was linked technically to the radio stations?
No, we were more pirating radio stations.
Okay.
It was not. It was because it was absolutely for lots of radio stations absolutely useless. It was just we were people apart. But I mean by this the instruments we were using were coming from the technique of broadcast and radio stations, like oscillators and filters, to actually set up the technically the radios and tape recorders and we. I mean, the beginning of electronic music at that time, tape recorders were exactly like what turntables became for DJs.
Right, and so this beginning that you're talking about is. Makes us think about electronic music as a niche field. So music for not so many people. But then you made Oxygène. That was one of the first electronic albums to go absolutely mainstream, to sell a lot, to go up in the charts and to become a bestseller. How was the road that led you to do an album like this?
Actually, I did quite some albums before, but with sales which would be quite respectable these days, but not at that time. I mean, I probably sold 100 or 200 copies of each, which means something in those days, but in these days. But I was always interested by trying to create, coming from the rock scene also in my own country. I was interested by actually trying to find a bridge between experimental music and pop music, always considering that the melody is a very important part of music. In days where contemporary music and serious music was quite the intellectual music, particularly in France. We are known in France for being sometimes a bit too intellectual, and in this during this period, it was really a kind of caricature of that state and of this way of thinking. And actually, I remember that famous composer at that time called Yannis Xenakis was telling us, everything which is related to emotions in music is suspect. That was the kind of dogma around all the contemporary music and avant-garde at that time. So I left this kind of environment quite quickly to experiment more into the rock and the pop scene I felt closer to. And
you are remembered also, mostly for the fact that you brought electronic music to big shows. Again, electronic music was something, and in certain cases it remains something that has not a big visual part, because actually there is no band, there's no show in some electronic music performance. But you made, how did you start thinking about making big shows, or even bigger shows, or that you realized after a few years after Oxygen?
I never been obsessed by breaking records. Obviously, it was not my idea. I mean, the idea was actually at the very early stage. I realized that actually electronic music instruments were quite different from any other instruments, like acoustic instruments, like a violin, a guitar, or electric guitar in rock instruments coming from the rock scene or from the classical scene. Have been devised for performance and for playing music and sharing music. And then we put microphones on them to put them in studios. For electronic instruments, it's the reverse. They've been devised and designed in studios, and then we had the problem to put them on stage. And we all know, and partly these days, to stay behind your computer, your synthesizer, your modular synthesizer behind it for 2 hours is not the most sexy thing in life. With the fact that already was starting this idea of recorded music, where you could actually basically listening to music everywhere, in your car, in the street, even with the first Walkman, with the obviously at home, and then people were starting to go to concerts not only to listen to music, but also to sharing a visual experience, to get some kind of visual correspondence with the artists they like, or some visual inputs. And then in those days, I felt that lots of places were not really adapted for electronic music, more for jazz or rock. But I always linked electronic music with space and outer space. And not necessarily outer space only, but actually the outdoor situation. And then came decided to try to link architecture and visuals to the music and creating kind of scenography around it in days where it was not really really popular. And it's probably from there that it created this kind of excitement for people who probably needed this kind of moments of gathering like festivals these days. I mean, it was not that common. And I remember the first time that I did this concert, the first concert of that kind in Paris, Place de la Concorde. I mean, around 1 million people came along, and it was such a shock. And it was like, yeah, but it was really like a kind of shock. I took some time to recover, because actually this whole phenomenon was beyond myself. It was just the fact that suddenly a kind of different approach of shows between the rock concert and a kind of land art or something like this, in installation in streets, so hijacking a place for one night, a kind of probably a premonitory idea of what a rave could be in the future.
And I'm sure that the huge concerts that you did all over the world, in China, the pyramids, in Texas, didn't all run smoothly. I mean, we all have experiences of something, organizational problems or technical things. Do you remember something particularly
the
strange that happened during
I mean, organizing in 2015 an event like this, I'm sure that the technical people here have been confronted to some problems. So you can imagine what it is. I mean, organizing a concert in the early 80s, just after Mao's time in Beijing, it's quite a challenge, technically, artistically, and socially also. But it was also part of the adventure and part of the event. The human point of view, the social point of view was and are very important in those kind of projects.
Then in the early 80s you did Music for a Supermarket, which was kind of a statement. In a way it was something against the industrialization of music. It was something that you did as a symbol of something that you wanted to say to the developing music industry. Can you tell about this?
Yes, at one stage I did my next studio album. I decided to release only one copy of it and to sell it in an auction as a painting, and to actually as a kind of statement about against this, I mean, quite dark approach that the music industry was starting to take with the launching the CD. I mean, being introduced as the grail of quality, and we knew even from the beginning that the CD technically was the kind of 78 of the digital era, and also the fact that suddenly the music industry would sell music like yogurts and toothpaste in supermarkets, and it would kill also the human link of the record shops, so important between the artists and the audience. So this is the reason behind the reason why I did this album, and I received lots of letters of insults from head of the majors, because on top of it, the side story was also, I said, also Pirate Me one day on a radio station to also. It was another side of the story.
So radio station, you were playing.
They played once the album. And actually, you have lots of now cassettes and recording of this album that I don't have, because actually the whole idea was to I photographed it was a series of Polaroid in the unique cover. I mean, showing the whole story of how this album has been made by recording sounds in supermarkets, starting by this, and then the last Polaroid, we had an empty space and I shot the owner, and then I put the photo of the owner as to end the story of this album.
So at the beginning of the CD, you thought about the fact that CD can be something that you didn't like as far as putting music in supermarkets. And so what do you think about the new methods? Because now the perception of music and the way people listen to music, especially the young audience, is completely different. You have streaming, you have whatever method, you have the liquid music, and you don't even have a CD. So what's your thought about this?
Actually, I mean, the reason why we are here tonight and this weekend is about a manifesto of the future or futures of music. And the real question is, does music or does industry of music has a future? And this is the real question and it's not only in terms of economy, in terms of almost on a social point of view, because these days we are living into a paradox, which the music is everywhere. Music never generated so much money, and authors and creators never got as little. And I mean, step by step, the music industry made mistakes after mistakes. I mean, this arrogant attitude that is still unfortunately going on, even in the dying music industry these days. I mean, started to develop the first dark move, which was the CD era, and then the fact that an industry which have created pirate radios wanted to put pirates in jail 25 years later. The fact that on the dying industry, suddenly Apple went to and say we are the saviors, and Steve Jobs says I'm the savior of the industry, and it was even worse. And now we are in a situation where we are confronted to digital platforms valued, if you take Spotify, probably $4 billion. And we are virtual shareholders of these companies, because what we are receiving from these companies at the end of the year is probably the price of a pizza without anchovies. You know, and this is something that we have to readjust. We have to create. If we are talking about the future of music, is today we have to think about how to create the new business model for music, and beyond music, for movies, for photography, for books. I mean, I'm not necessarily pessimistic, but I think that we have to make noise as musicians, and as we know how to deal with noise, and we should send a clear message, because it's not only the problem for a niche of musicians in Europe and in America sitting maybe on their pot of gold. It's actually far beyond than this. It's a problem involving every family in the world, because in every family you have a kid, you have a daughter, a sister, a brother, I mean, dreaming becoming a photographer, filmmaker, musician, and is not going to be able to live his dream or her dream, getting first of all a job on the side, and then just abandoning and just giving up. And that's something that we have to address. And I see this whole idea as beyond the idea of rights and money. It's the concept, almost on a philosophical and social point of view, of what intellectual property means. And intellectual property is like environment, is like ecology. 30 years ago, we had this discussion with Laurie earlier tonight. I mean, when I started to do oxygen, we were not very much to be involved in environment, and we were considered as kind of neo-hippies. And these days, everybody on the planet knows more or less and are conscious about the fact that ecology is important. It's better to take care of your environment than not taking care of it. And it's the same thing with intellectual property. I mean, when you think about all these drawings and graphics that the advertising world, the fashion world is stealing from the Maoris and the Aborigines, the fact that Google, for instance, is saying, okay, we give Africa free access to everything. We are weakening. We are increasing the gap between the emerging countries and ourselves. And is it the real future of music to have the Google style of music to African people, or is it more our duty with technology to help people to reinforce their own identity by helping them to promote their own music and then all cultural identity. This is the challenge, and when we are talking about the future of music, this is one of the big issues of the future of music, and it's beyond economy. It's about, again, it's a social point of view, and it's something that the civil society has to take in consideration as one of the big challenge for the 21st century.
And talking about like the rest of the world and other civilization and traditions and cultures, with Zuluk you approached you took the electronic element to the music of the world, or the opposite side. You took some world music influences and you elaborated in your language. How did you discover this kind of music?
I'd always been interested by linguistic, and ironically I wrote quite lots of songs and lyrics in French and for French singers and artists and rock artists, and then I did lots of instrumental music, but I always obviously be very interested by vocals. But at one stage I thought it would be very interesting to do an album with vocals, but not for the meaning of the words, but for the sound of them. And then I traveled all around the world, recording lots of different chants or languages, all languages also, or sounds from Russian radios or Chinese radios or American preachers. Like it was at the same time that David Byrne and Brian Eno did this great album, My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, and they were probably the two more sampled albums of that time. And actually, it's one of the first time we met with Laurie Anderson. Where I asked her, I was very impressed by not only by all what she was doing at that time, but also because she was involved also in project in Tokyo and trying to sing in Japanese and using. She was thinking a lot about how to use the words and vocals of languages in a different way. And then we went to do this track together called Diva, where actually we tried and she succeeded to create a kind of imaginary language, which could mean something not by the word we can't understand, because by definition they don't exist, but by the way they are spoken, by the way they are sung, and the way they are expressed. And this is the idea behind this album.
And coming back to the performances, you have been, of course, a big influence on the recent generation of electronic big performances. Thinking about Daft Punk, big shows, or the Chemical Brothers, or even experiences like you mentioned the raves before, but like Tomorrowland. The fact that electronic music can be on a big stage for a lot of people with a lot of visuals. Do you see these experiences, artistic and performance experiences, as your children, or something that you have been instrumental in doing?
It's more to them to say, to comment on this. What I could say that actually I always been convinced that electronic music would become a kind of generic way of composition, because it's not a genre. It's not like hip hop or punk or rock. It's a different way of approaching music composition, even production, and even today distribution by digital means. So today we can see that electronic music has no boundaries anymore. It's everywhere, and the people involved, DJs and people involved with electronic music performances, they're actually confronted to what have been confronted 30 years ago, by how to be behind your turntable and not being boring, and then thinking about what kind of visual and scenography we can create and invent. I've always been very interested by and even when I was a teenager and I started music by opera as an art form. I always been fascinated by these great musicians working with carpenters and painters, and to try to enhance and to tell a story. And what we are doing in the electronic music field and in the rock scene as well, with the great shows that, for instance, Depeche Mode are doing tour after tour, is involving lots of thoughts about and creative thoughts about how to not visualizing your songs or your music. I'm a kind of anti-MTV guy. I love music too much to really enjoy MTV, which is actually not existing anymore, more or less. But what I mean by this is actually, sometimes you have a song you really like, and you see a video, and you say, "My God, it has nothing to do with my idea of and my vision of the song." Actually, one of the beauty of music is actually it's the most interactive mode of expression, because you can let the audience creating their own story or their own images. You actually, as a musician, you do the soundtrack for the audience, and so the visual, which in my opinion is exciting, interesting on stage these days, is when you try not to tell a story, but just having the visual being a part of your of the arrangement. You know, while we are talking, we have these great red lights. Some people could find this awful, but I feel this really beautiful, like it's a nice accompaniment from any kind of audio environment we could have, even talking and trying to talk on the microphone. But you know, it's this kind of audio-visual relationship is always something that interested me, and I've been really heavily influenced at the beginning of my career by movies, because when you are talking about heritage and source of inspiration, working actually both ways. I think we as some people from the rock scene and we of my generation, we had the privilege to open territories, to open doors on virgin territories where we didn't have lots of people before or behind us. And these days, obviously, a young guy starting music is actually he's starting, I would say, old, with a hell of an heritage behind him, or her, and so that's obviously more challenging. But I think the visual aspect is very important. I mean, my advice to young kids wanting to perform on stage, they should go to theater, they should go to ballet and to exhibitions and what they do. And actually, one of the good things of the internet is actually you have so many images that if you have the right filter, and if you create the right filter, you can get a lot from the internet these days.
France has become one of the most one of the countries who developed more interesting and successful electronic music, especially in the last 20 years. Is there some artist from France that you particularly liked or followed, or that you met, or what do you think about the so-called French touch and all the French electronics music?
I would say before everything else that actually electronic music has nothing to do with America. It's nothing to do with American pop. It's coming from the European tradition of classical music, this long instrumental piece of music, and it's been born really in Europe, in Germany and France with Stockhausen, Pierre Schaeffer, in the BBC studio in London, but basically the continental Europe with the Russians, Leon Theremins, and the futurism in Italy with the Art of Noise and Russolo, and that is the reason why the Berlin scene, the techno scene we were talking about just before, the French scene is quite pertinent. I always thought that rock and roll is the ethnic music of America and the UK. It became universal with radio stations and pop culture. And I think electronic music has its foundations in continental Europe. And this is the reason why I think that you have lots of quite an important scene in the French scene, for instance. You were asking me, I mean, what kind of... I love lots of artists. Air is one of my favorite. We used to say that actually between us that there is some oxygen in air. So
it's quite same meaning in a way. All right. And then you talk about the influences. You know, they took the name from the same concept.
They are great musicians. I mean, we recently collaborated in my current album, and with collaborating with lots of different people, and Laurie is in a part of the early Depeche Mode also, with Vince Clarke is also involved, and Air obviously also.
In fact, the next session was about collaboration. Today, in a few times that there was this topic coming out in the conversation about musicians recording alone and recording in collaboration. The fact of many recording studios closing because they're out of business, and the pleasure and the utility of making music with other people, with other musicians. In a way, you did both, because you recorded some albums by yourself, but you had a lot of crossing with other musicians from other culture. What's your take about this?
Actually, I mean, for this particular project, Electronica is a project really based on what you're saying. So I could say a quick word on this. I mean, it was linked with the idea of collaborating with people who are a source of inspiration to me, and there is a specific reason for every artist I wanted to collaborate with. But in days, as you just said, Luca, about the idea that in these days it's very fashionable to have featuring in album, and featurings, I don't like this word that much, because it's just this idea of asking somebody to do a top line, adding a vocal or guitar lead or whatever, or synth part, and to somebody you will never meet, you will never talk to, and it's something which I didn't want for this, because I wanted to try to merge our DNAs and also I mean together physically. So I traveled a lot to meet with everyone, and to also another dogma was also to compose a demo and a piece of music in function of the fantasy I had vis-à-vis the collaborator, but leaving enough space for him or her to express, obviously, to express himself or herself.
So the new album is not like files going from one artist to another and doing, but you actually met the people.
Absolutely. It was the reason why of the core of the project.
Yeah. Right, and you involved people from different generations, from like new DJs to.
Yes, it was actually covering. It is still, because actually everybody said yes, and then I ended with 2.5 hours of music. So I have to divide, like a movie, this project in two parts. One part being released just now, and the second part is going to be released in next April. I'm just finishing it now.
So we're talking about an album and then another album, but coming back to the different and new methods of listening to music, the big question is, do albums still matter? I mean, you probably know, everyone knows that you put out an album, but probably this album will be heard in small parts in playlists of people who just take one song and put it into some personalized playlist. So the album as an art form is something that still matters for the present and the future for an artist.
So I would say 3 short answers to your very interesting question. The first, it would be yes, yes, and yes. The first reason why, first yes, is because you have the revival of the vinyl, and people are actually discovering again the importance of the support of music and the fact that something lasts. The second thing is actually we are living in a world where we are in constant zapping mode on the internet, where we have the focus time of 2 minutes on YouTube, but at the same time, people can stay with their girlfriend or boyfriend with an entire weekend watching House of Cards or True Detective without sleeping. So we have this kind of relationship on cultural content, which could be instant or very long, and that was not existing even few years ago, and it's the reason why that the albums or long albums are absolutely relevant these days. And the other thing is actually an artist is also here to try to break the to break the system. And if the system is going to zap in the zapping mode, you have to do some piece of music that could last 8 hours, what I've done once, and even Brian Eno is beating me by far because I think he did a piece of music lasting 5 years. So, 5 years. Yes.
That's good. So it's saying that there has been a switch of methods between television and music. Before, you would listen to a whole album and then you were watching an episode a week of a TV series. Now you can listen to, you listen to one song and then another song after a week, but you see a whole series of TV shows in a night.
Yes, and I think that I think it's very true also for music. I mean, even if you take, for instance, Spotify and the system of playlists, it's actually you take a playlist and you can okay, it's not your album, but it's a form of album of your choice, where you take the piece of music you like and then you create your own music environment. And with this project I've been involved with recently, and I've been involved with at the moment, it's exactly the idea I had, that you can actually go through one track. For instance, I did a track with John Carpenter, and some people young kids particularly don't know who John Carpenter could be, but because they like, I don't know, M83 or Air, they would then discover something else in the album. And I think it's an interesting approach these days to consider both formats. I'm saying in an artistic point of view.
A few years ago, you did a tour with the original gear, the original instrumentation that you used probably in Oxygen, right? It was, why this? I mean, you wanted to make the people listen to the original sounds with the original instruments. What drove you to this kind of decision?
I think it was. I think at the beginning I thought it was fun. It became a nightmare, but it was fun at the beginning, because in days where we are also considering, and it's sometimes true that people are behind just a box and not doing anything. It was interesting in days where you have this kind of performance linked with electronic music. So, okay, we're going to play electronic music like a jazz quartet, without MIDI, without computer, and just playing. It was possible because Oxygen was made with on 8 tracks. So we were 4 musicians with 2 hands, 8 hands, and we could deal with this. Yeah. That's right, exactly.
Okay. And what's next for your music performances? Now you have an album. Now there's another album in the pipeline. And do you plan to take your music on the road and in concerts?
Yeah, I would like at what stage, make a short comment about what happened in Paris last week in the Bataclan, and it's a famous club that and place where lots of musicians have played, and obviously this is we know that this is the music which have been attacked, and we could talking about the future of music tonight. We can also wonder about the future of concerts and the future of musical event or artistic event involving a crowd, whatever the size. indoor or outdoor. And I think my comment, and I would like to say that between us today, is actually more than ever we should go to concerts. We should do concerts. Promoters have to adapt themselves to this new state of and to this new situation. And but obviously, it's going to change the way we are going now to concert with suddenly less innocence, but probably with more determination, probably. And I'm quite impatient to go back on stage this year. I mean, next year, for all these reasons. Plus the fact that when you are stuck in studio for 5 years, after a while you want to go outside, and when you are on stage for quite a while, you want to go back in studio. Is the reason why that I'm still there, because it's a constant frustration being too long on stage. You go back to studio, you make an album, and then you go back on stage. This is the life of any musicians, and it's what I hope that will continue without all this sadness that we are sharing with these people. Some of sound engineers and lots of people who have been killed last week were close to us. But it's also it shouldn't change our habits. It shouldn't change. We shouldn't be. We can be afraid. We can be scared, but we should not change our habits, and we should continue doing music, because music has been attacked in Paris. It has not been said enough, because actually in Daesh strategy, the idea is they consider, as we know, music instruments and music in general as something which is absolutely something to condemn and evil. And so we have to, as artists, we have to react just by standing. If we are not standing up ourselves for, who will?
You were in Paris during the night of the attacks.
Yes, actually, I was in studio with for the album, and I just heard the news, and we had constant news from friends and relatives. And then I left the studio at 4:30 in the morning. It was so strange in Paris, because we are all here in generations. We've not been able confronted, I think, I mean, in Europe, on a European point of view, on a Western point of view, to having seen our country being in war, in your tone transform in kind of war zone of war. And that was the case. And when I went back home that night, it was really strange, because it was totally silent, and you have no lights, and you just had dozens of police cars without sirens and no light, because they were probably looking for terrorists or whatever. And it was so dark, so surreal. And you could feel the sadness of a town sweating, and it's something that I shall remember for a long time.
We have kind of like 10 minutes left, so let's open the audience to questions for Monsieur Jarre.
Could you tell me how you went from releasing it on a small label to it breaking out? Which country it broke out in, and how that happened?
Actually, it came from the UK, from Radio 1. We decided to play the whole album on Radio 1. The whole album was played. It didn't happen that many times, as we know, and then it's restarted in the UK and also in Netherlands, where also another contact of the small independent label I was signed with also released it, and then it started like this. And I remember it was very funny, because I remember I was walking on the Champs-Élysées with my publisher Francis Dreyfus, and I had no idea about if it was going to work or not, and we saw Elton John, going out from a record shop with 10 copies, and I remember that my publishers told me, I think it's going to be a success.
Elton John has this fame of giving gifts to his friends with records that he likes.
Yes, I hope that. He told me that later on that he told me that he kept one copy for him.
Of course,
actually.
yes.
It was not only for his friends.
But 9 friends and 1 for him.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. It's been really, really lovely. Thank you. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on how movies influence you. Any specific movies and how they have influenced you?
We are talking again about the future and the future of music, but the future in general. And actually, when I started, we all had this this idea of a vision of the future, that cars would fly after year 2000, like the education and the social system would be ideal, and that the man just walked on the moon, and then obviously next time it will be like 2001, Jupiter and beyond the solar system, and then in the meantime the Concorde stopped. We are now slower than before. We lost our vision after year 2000 of the future. It's like if the end of the 20th century has been lived like a beginning of a century, where everything was possible, and the beginning of the 21st century would be lived like the end of something, the end of an era, where we have quite an anxiety towards the future, towards the image of the future, and it's interesting to see that all the superheroes symbolizing the future are from Marvel, and they are heroes from the 1940s and 50s, and we just put smartphones in their hands, but they're still very vintage. And I think that I've been really heavily, obviously, like lots of people of my generation, by obviously movies such as 2001 and this kind of, and also all this kind of innocent vision of the future that we lost. And I think we have to recreate this today. And it's starting, talking about science fiction, and if you take a movie such as Interstellar, for instance, Interstellar for me is really the 2001 of this decade.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Jarre, for this conversation. Very interesting.